Every few decades there seems to be a spate of sci-fi movies focusing on social insects. In the 1950s there was Them, Giant Ants. The Wasp Woman, royal jelly concoction transforms cosmetics queen into a werewasp succubus. In the 1970s, Killer Bees, pretty self-explanatory, and The Swarm, rampaging honeybees ravaging Houston are ultimately defeated by a giant refrigerator. And, most recently, Ant-Man and the Wasp, which at least casts our insect sistren in a more favorable light. Giant insects seem to hold a particular fascination for the human psyche, and we have recently had our own close encounter with a plus-sized alien arthropod that threatened to invade our tranquil shores here on Vancouver Island. But a bespoke band of beekeepers beat back the bee-eating beasties by besieging their burrowed bunker. Used a lot of bees there, but we saved a lot of bees here. I was first introduced to the insect in question, the Asian giant hornet, AGH, or Vespa mandarinia, in 1999 while visiting a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer and her Nepalese husband, who were working with local keepers of the eastern honeybee, Apis cerana. But at that time, my closest encounter was with a single dead specimen shown here. Note the dark coloration on the abdomen, which varies from that of the same species, but different variety that we encountered here on Vancouver Island. In contrast, the eastern honeybee, Apis cerana, and the western honeybee, Apis mellifera, that's the honeybee with which we are all familiar, are considered as separate species. As shown here, Apis cerana is basically just a diminutive cousin of the western honeybee, and it can be kept in scaled-down versions of the same types of hives used to keep the western honeybee. While on the subject of closely related species, some of you may remember hearing about the find, in May of 2019, near Vancouver's port, of another Asian hornet, ultimately identified as Vespa sorer, which is a slightly smaller sister species to Vespa mandarinia. The discovery of these exotic wasp species caused quite a bit of concern, because our western honeybees are already harried by well-established yellowjacket wasp species and have little defense against Asian giant hornets, unlike their smaller relatives Apis cerana, as shown in this BBC documentary excerpt.
The bees rush out in defense, but this is their undoing. One by one, they're picked off. More hornets join the attack. The hornets emit a chemical rallying cry, and this triggers a unique phenomenon. They no longer carry bee carcasses back to the nest. Instead, they slaughter, then cast aside the body of every defender they meet. The European bees outnumber the hornets 1,000 to 1, but they didn't evolve alongside these huge Asian predators and have no effective defense. 30,000 honeybees have died in 3 hours, falling victim to just 30 giant
Instead
hornets.
of going out to dogfight attacking hornets, eastern honeybees wait within the hive for hornets to enter.
Then one is caught. It's the signal the others have been waiting for. Surrounded by vibrating bodies, the hornet at the core of the bee ball begins to overheat. The bees have the advantage, a heat tolerance 2 degrees above that of their enemy. At 46 degrees Celsius, the aggressor is roasted alive. The wild bees have spent millions of years living with the enemy. That's why they alone have developed this extraordinary survival strategy.
After that gruesome footage, a short musical interlude.
Giant hornets in Nanaimo were before they've never been here. If you cross them then their stinging very surely will turn ya. The keepers want to swipe them left upon the tinder. I'm underin' ya.
Here are the relative sizes of a western honeybee in the bottom right corner, and counterclockwise from there, a German yellowjacket, Vespula germanica, bald-faced hornets, Dolica vespula maculata, and 3 Asian giant hornets captured in Nanaimo. The elephant in the top left is not to scale. Notice the prominent banding on the Asian giant hornets, marking these individuals as likely belonging to a strain native to Japan. You can see why these bee-eating behemoths caused a bit of a stir when they started showing up around hives in the south part of Nanaimo, where their discovery by beekeeper John Duff was reported to the provincial apiculturist Paul van Westendorp, who, thereafter, remained in close communication with the officers of the Nanaimo Beekeepers Club, which included Peter Lange and Moufida and Giant Holubeshen. Moufida and John mapped out sighting information provided to them and combined this with what they figured hornets would need to survive. Their triangulation methods led them near the end of Honey Drive to a trail running through a wooded area adjoining Robbins Park. While locating the nest, John became, as far as we know, the first person to be stung by an Asian giant hornet in North America.
Felt like being kicked in the chest, and the pain lasted the entire night.
While attending to John's wound, the Holubeshens quickly assembled a rapid response team consisting of themselves, Peter Lange, and myself. I had experience and equipment for collecting several species of yellowjackets at their nests for the pharmaceutical preparation of desensitization serum.
With wasps.
And now, I'll largely leave explanation of the extraction to the footage reported on scene. I'm now the second person to be stung.
Okay.
Ouch.
Sorry.
What's in there, Conrad?
Carbon dioxide.
Oh, carbon, okay. Are you taking more samples?
Yep.
So where did you get stung?
Just wherever my pants were tight against my clothes.
Do you need more alcohol or something?
I'm just going to transfer these. Actually, since you guys are
Not doing anything.
relatively
Unoccupied?
unemployed,
Yes.
You want
I
these
think you
inside
could
this?
transfer those into the bottle. You can just grab if you're not. I mean, it's just alcohol.
Yeah, they're
So where do you want them transferred to?
into the bottle.
Into the bottle.
and then I'll get some more in the wide. Cause it's way easier to use the wide mouth.
Is that a stinger?
If they're not dead, then they're
Almost
more
stunned.
much more hardy than I give them credit.
And that's what Paul said. He said they don't die right away. So. Okay, yep. Oh, good. A little stick helps.
If they start buzzing, I'm dropping this.
Oh, thanks, John.
Please do. I think they are a little drunk.
God, they look Jurassic-like. The sound they make is unreal.
Mm-hmm.
This one's flying around. John, and yeah.
Oh, absolutely, John. This must have been like a shock when you just get hit by this thing.
Where's the queen?
Out of, oh, that's the queen?
I think so.
Let me see.
Oh, look at her. Look at the
Oh
size.
my God.
So
Let me see the queen.
This
We're
is
gonna
my-
take a picture.
This is
this
yours.
is
huh?
another bucket of this bucket is mine
This
also.
yours is your bucket. Oh my God, the queen.
Oh my God, are you pretty? Look how beautiful she is. Oh my goodness, you're so beautiful.
Shall
Look
we
at the
sing?
wings.
You are so beautiful.
No, but look at the. Do you
I
see
know.
her?
I know. It is
Look at this.
God's creature
I
for
think
sure.
I think I might have got one of the drones in there as well.
Oh my God.
What a beautiful, safe spot. There's one in there, I can hear it.
Can you?
Something's buzzing. In here where the nest is.
Inside the
Inside the
in the
nest.
bag, in the garbage bag.
Oh, it's in the garbage bag maybe.
Maybe.
That could be. Look at this, how
Yeah.
beautiful. Look at these larvae here. Look at this. Look at them.
John, do you want to take a picture? Come and take a. I've taken a video, but
Look at
Here.
At this point, I think we're best served to just dose it with foam in case anybody comes back.
Yes.
So if in case I don't,
They might be pissed
just
off.
because they might be pissed off.
Oh,
Yeah, from a safety, public
I'll
safety.
foam it and hope that if anybody comes back that they get enough of a dose that they don't hurt anybody.
oh, that's why. Okay, now I get it.
You know, it kind of turned out really well that we came at night. I mean,
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
because, oh, there.
Well, most excellent job at finding the nest. That was
Well,
the main thing.
well, I tell you, I was not expecting it. We were just kind of trying to be logical, but didn't expect immediate success. Oh, one on your... Oh, no, that's a beetle. God. I'm sorry.
I was thinking the same thing.
It's like, you know, I'm going to have nightmares.
You also beekeeper?
I am, yes.
Ah, okay.
He did the top bar hive presentation for us, and bees for Babar.
I remember. Now,
Yes.
sorry, I didn't recognize you
He had the
there.
beautiful
In
outfit.
the dark.
I remember your outfit. It was lovely. It was very different than what you were wearing. That's just...
Clockwise from the top left, you can see the nest entrance as first encountered, and a comb of larvae that was removed from the underground nest. And at the bottom center, and just off center of the tub there, you can see the queen that we removed from the nest and preserved in alcohol. If you listen carefully in this next bit, you can hear the larvae rasping at the sides of the cells in their cardboard-like comb. The noise serves much in the same way as the chirping of baby birds to elicit feeding from the adults. In their native range, beekeepers will frequently dig up nests of the AGH much in the way that we had done, and usually conclude the exercise by frying up and eating the adult hornets and their immatures. I've eaten honeybee larvae numerous times, and I suspect AGH larvae would have the same kind of bland, soft shrimpiness. It is also my suspicion that the gastronomic potential of the wasps is exaggerated and promoted by wily Japanese beekeepers in the hopes of encouraging others to assist them in digging up and eliminating the pesky predators. Unfortunately, we disposed of the larvae before it occurred to us to fry up some brood food. Even the spit of the larvae has taken on an aura of glamour. Adult wasps cannot digest the flesh of the insects they collect for their brood. Instead, the workers mash up the prey and feed the ground meat to their larvae. The larvae digest the hornet-made hamburger and then regurgitate a slurry rich in amino acids and other nutrients, on which the adults subsist. So the feeding goes both ways. Most beekeepers are familiar with the honeybee equivalent of this social feeding, technically termed trophallaxis, which is important for maintaining colonial cohesion, and for ripening honey in the case of our apine allies. Much in the way that honeybee royal jelly is ascribed magical human nutritive powers, the regurgitant from the wasps has been advertised in Japan as being an athletic performance enhancer. Such brews are said to contain VAAM, Vespa amino acid mixture. Larval hornet spit is now produced there synthetically and is included as an ingredient in a booster tonic that is touted as improving endurance during sporting activities, apparently by inducing ketosis. However, ironically, the only significantly demonstrated effect in humans, in trials with cyclists, seems to be to slow the heart during exertion, which would hardly seem to be beneficial. And, if I've understood promotional material like this correctly, it has the power to turn overweight middle-aged men into sporty young women. Alas, the only real confirmation that close association with Hymenopteran secretions is beneficial to people remains the clear evidence that beekeepers are smarter, better looking, and have a better sense of humor than everybody else. The characteristics that define eusociality are overlapping generations of adults that exhibit a reproductive division of labor in which cooperative brood-rearing duties are shared amongst reproductive and non-reproductive forms, known as castes. The resulting colonial group benefits from strength in numbers that bestows advantages for group defense or offense, i.e. predation, and in resource acquisition or even monopolization through the establishment of territories to control scarce forage, nest sites, etc., through which they gain reproductive efficiencies. The downside of such group living is that the densely populated colonial nest represents a prominent prize to organisms adapted to circumvent the group's defenses, which may even be breached by internal competition, as in the case of laying workers and honeybees, or be vulnerable to the spread of disease or parasites, such as varroa mites of honeybees, or stylops parasites of the Hymenoptera in general. The females of these latter spend their adult lives protruding from the sclerites of their host. The males are free-living and capable of flight once they have emerged from the bee or wasp inside of which they have passed their larval and pupal phases. At this point, I'm going to take you along on a number of off-ramps I took on the information highway when I was reading up on the general subject of invasive species, and it's probably about time to define the term. An invasive species is one that has been introduced, intentionally or not, to an area to which it is not native, that has the ability to spread to a degree believed to cause damage to the environment, human economy, or human health. But there is certainly an element of subjectivity to all this. For instance, what do you do with a problem like the merman? After all, one woman's mate is another person's poisson. So do you marry a mer person or marinate them? In other words, who decides when a species crosses the line from simply introduced to invasive? Creatures like the European brown snail and the American bullfrog have often been deliberately introduced in various locations as food items, but have become serious agricultural or environmental pests. Of note, the American bullfrog is spread widely across the globe and is of concern because of its voracious feeding habits and its serving as a vector carrier of the fungal disease chytridomycosis, threatening populations of amphibians worldwide. The European brown snail is well established on southern Vancouver Island and was confirmed in Surrey in 2018, where it has become a pest of farms and gardens, as it has in other areas to which it has been carried. So what safeguards are in place? At the national level, under the Plant Protection Act, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, has the authority to restrict the import, sale, possession, and movement of pest plants, or pests of plants, into and within Canada. It's an ill wind that blows no one some good, so the Inter-Ministry Invasive Species Working Group, IMIS-WIG, was created to decide if actions are warranted against an immigrant form of life. The IMIS-WIG includes representatives from the Ministries of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, Agriculture, Environment, Transportation and Infrastructure, and Energy and Mines. They work in a public-private partnership with the Invasive Species Council of BC, a non-profit organization that collaborates with them to educate and inform British Columbians to reduce the spread and impacts of non-native species within BC and to coordinate and communicate research efforts and training programs. The BC Invasive Species Early Detection Rapid Response Plan provides detailed direction on decisions and actions required to identify, assess, and respond to new invasive species incursions anywhere in BC. The BC EDRR plan is designed to complement international and federal initiatives and commitments. The IMIS-WIG is supported by some regulatory authority, but is limited in cases such as that of the Asian giant hornet when there is no clear-cut link to plant pests. In BC, the Controlled Alien Species Regulation covers many taxa but does not include insects. The Forest and Range Practices Act allows for the control of insects, diseases, animals, or abiotic factors impacting forestry. The Bee Act, interestingly, includes insect pests of bees as diseases, but regulates only the activities of beekeepers, and in the context of invasive species, only requires that beekeepers report observations of any new disease. So, basically, dealing with an invasive insect species that is not a plant pest seems to be primarily a social endeavor rather than a legal proceeding. Which is perhaps fitting, as social insects seem particularly pre-adapted to becoming invasive pests, with which they share many of the same features, those being having few natural enemies, rapid reproductive rate, long-lived reproductives, the ability for populations to disperse widely and quickly, having generalist resource needs, and being able to exploit disturbed environments or resources that are patchy in space or time. There have been many examples of pestiferous social insects spreading in North America over recent decades, such as for the German yellowjacket, the Formosan termite, and the Argentine, Pharaoh, and imported red fire ants. And of course, an African strain of honeybee was able to spread across the tropical Americas from Brazil north to the southern US in less than 50 years. This, of course, as many of you are ready to interject, was a case of interspecific competition between invasive subspecies in which Apis mellifera scutellata supplanted in the tropical Americas European-derived strains of honeybees. The temperate zone evolved honeybees were first introduced to the New World, as far as can be traced, in Jamestown, Virginia in 1621. Technically, this was a reintroduction, as 14 million years ago there was a native species of honeybee that has long been extinct. The 17th century importation began the first wave of honeybee invasion, which took 231 years to cross the continent and was probably hampered by a dearth of suitable forage across the grassland prairies, until introduced clover spread into these vast plains, bringing bees into the abode of the bison. As an aside, the long winters of the prairies of Canada provided still greater challenges, and for many decades there was not a sustained beekeeping practice north of the 49th parallel. Instead, tenders of bees were honey producers, who killed off their colonies each fall after the honey harvest. Restocking the boxes in the spring with bees produced in the southern U.S. was more economical than allowing the bees enough food stores to get them through the prolonged months of cold. The introduction of the varroa mite drove to extinction the feral populations of honeybees that were once relatively common across the continent and led to stricter controls on cross-border bee shipments. Nonetheless, to this day, the provincial body of apiculturists is called the BC Honey Producers rather than BC Beekeepers Association, despite Canadians now keeping their bees year-round. To get back to interspecific impacts and competition of alien species in this hemisphere, unless your thought processes are considerably different than mine, at this point you are likely considering an elephantine alien in the ruins, concerning one of the most invasive species of all, which is, of course, the rat. But after that, Homo sapiens. And so, another digression. There seems to be a significant correlation between the arrival of human beings in various parts of the world and the contemporaneous extirpation of megafauna in those areas. The only areas of the world where megafauna persist are in those areas in which they coexisted with humans prior to the latter developing any significant technology beyond the hand axe. In these areas of Africa and Eurasia, large species of animals seem to be able to develop strategies to avoid being overhunted by humans, or the humans there followed cultural practices that did not culminate in extirpating all large animal species. Megafaunal extinctions following on human immigration into an area doesn't seem to be a simple case of overhunting, but it certainly seems highly unlikely that humans are not part of a combination of factors that involves loss of large species. The subject is a fascinating rabbit hole, and you can find some very interesting documentaries, such as that from which I grabbed these charts, by searching YouTube for Humans and Megafaunal Extinctions Lectures. But my point here is that even early technologies across cultures gave humans the potential to be devastatingly invasive species. And of course, the waves of populations of peoples from the Eastern Hemisphere had devastating impacts on First Nations here, starting with epidemics that likely reduced endemic human populations in the Americas by 90%. Christopher C. Mann's book, 1491, gives a very interesting account of recent reassessments of the rich cultures of the pre-Columbian Western Hemisphere, and Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, discusses means by which we might curb our natural invasiveness and its ultimate ecological consequences. Penultimately, this digression provides the opportunity to acknowledge the Nanaimo First Nations in whose traditional territory I reside. Lastly, it should be obvious that I'm a big fan of science fiction, in which the theme of alien invasion provides a metaphor to examine the tugs of war we face between fears of the other and the draw of the exotic and novel, between self-interest and sociality, between War of the Worlds and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Crises and conflicts confront us in many parts of the world, as carrying capacities approach collapse from the interactions of climate change and population pressures. The problems of migration this causes and the question of how constrained we are in dealing with those challenges by ancient biological impulses are, I think, a large part of what feeds our fascination with invasive species. So let's get back to them, and specifically again, to hornets.
Reports of a second nest turned out to be observations of the prominent debris from our eradication efforts. A few straggler workers who had escaped into the brush during the nest extraction or which had overnighted elsewhere tried to return to the old nest entrance. There they succumbed to the wasp foam sprayed earlier or to thwacking.
Got it.
Nice shot.
Is there still more around town?
We hope not.
Oh my god, they're huge. So how do you think they got here?
Could have been a whole a nest that was tucked away in a nook or a cranny of a shipping container, or it could have been a reproductive female squirreled away in a shipment of pulp, wood chips.
They're huge.
The Intra-Ministry Invasive Species Working Group has a modest array of traps set out near the sites where invasive Vespa species have been documented. They are planning on modifying the traps in light of our find, as the apertures of the traps are currently a very tight fit for AGH workers and might not accommodate gynes, the technical term for reproductive females. In addition, they are following the research of scientists in England who have developed, for yet another species, Vespa velutina, the Asian or yellow-legged hornet, a radio tag that is small enough to attach to live trapped hornets to track them back to their nests. For beekeepers or others who wish to control yellowjackets or monitor for hornets, this homemade trap, a wooden board with meat or fish stapled to it, then flipped over a container of soapy water, catches up to 10 times as many yellowjackets as commercial traps. Over the same 2-hour period, the trap on the left caught 77 wasps, that on the right 110, and the water bath contraption collected 790 yellowjackets. I was surprised to learn recently that Greek scientists found flat sticky traps superior for catching yellowjackets, in comparison to 2 designs similar to the commercial traps that require wasps to enter a container. The sticky traps generally caught about 1/3 more wasps than did the container traps under similar conditions. Indeed, if nests are not hunted down, sticky traps are the means of passive control preferred by beekeepers for controlling V. mandarinia in their native distribution. I'm certainly going to try the flat sticky traps for yellowjackets, but there still may be a place for other do-it-yourself designs, such as this on the right, being promoted by British anti-hornet researchers and baited with rotten fish, pear, or beer baits. I'm going to compare catches with my own alteration on the left, which is basically just the same design flipped over, but my hunch is that wasps will be more inclined to fly up into a funnel rather than to crawl down into one. Those on the alert for invasive hornets may come across lookalikes, although the term is relative. The horntail wasp and the elm sawfly are both vegetarian wood wasps whose females, as their name implies, inject their eggs into wood where they hatch and feed. The insects are approximately the same length as AGH, and the horntail has a similar color scheme, sometimes enough to cause confusion. The Conservation Officer Service recently relayed to me a case of mistaken identity involving concerns over this 1/4 inch long carrion beetle. Nonetheless, we take false alarms with open arms. Non-hornet critters don't give us the jitters, because they're a lot less work. Stings are top of mind for most people when they think about bees, wasps, and hornets, and AGH packs a pretty good punch, and John and I, as beekeepers, are probably less reactive than non-beekeepers would be. The venom contains compounds that can cause tissue necrosis and anaphylactic shock, and their 1/4 inch long stings can penetrate multiple layers of clothing and draw blood. Getting stung by an AGH is like having red-hot thumbtacks driven into the flesh. Some people aren't into that. Caution should always be exercised around hornets and yellowjackets, especially when near their nests. As with any stinging insects, the public should be advised to follow this general rule when near hymenopteran nests. If stings have been nil, it's best to stand still, but once you've been stung, cage your eyes and just run. Additionally, those who may encounter V. mandarinia are encouraged to slap, snap, zap, and wrap a specimen. Slap it with a stick to kill it, snap a photo of it, zap an email off to info@bcinvasives.ca and nanaimobeekeepers@gmail.com, and wrap it in a Ziploc bag and freeze it in case the sample is needed. My wife says, as a poet, I do pretty well at expelling entire species from the continent.